Thank you, everyone, for tolerating my virtual presentation today. I hope, even though I'm not here with you in person, in the flesh, that this presentation I've put together you find still very interesting, evocative, and response-worthy. I know that I'm very excited to share this with you and to receive any feedback that you might have. So the title of my paper, which is also a project that I am proposing, the title of my paper is The Red Horse, Exploring the Possibility of Projection Mapping as an Equine-Based Science Art Worlding. And this is by Dr. Tamar V.S. McKee, and I am currently an unaffiliated independent scholar, unaffiliated university independent scholar. So I'd like to begin with a quote. The body remembers, the bones remember, the joints remember, even the little finger remembers. Memory is lodged in pictures and feelings in the cells themselves. Like a sponge filled with water, anywhere flesh is pressed, wrung, even touched lightly, a memory may flow out in a stream. And that's by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. In 2011, I conducted fieldwork for my PhD dissertation in Bluegrass, Kentucky, where I examined the relationships forged between retired thoroughbred racehorses and their rescuers, a diverse, multi-sided human community that ranged from elite equestrian trainers to inmates at a local minimum security prison. For the ensuing dissertation, Ghost Herds, Rescuing Horses and Horse People in Bluegrass, Kentucky, I organized the bulk of my analysis through chapters focused on life stories of the most illustrative horses in my research. Ferdy, Fly, Shuby, and Manny, just to name a few. In the time since conducting this research and its write-up, the saliency of these horses' stories and their attendant human characters remains, along with a preoccupation that marks on bodies matter. Be they visible empirical marks like scars or deformities, or ones brought forth in interaction with human interlocutors, such as fear responses or demonstrations of affection. One of my strongest and lasting findings was that these horses carried incredible, always ongoing life stories with them that were as politically deployable as they were poetically impactful. These stories especially emerged when deep ethnographic and multi-species attention was paid to their presence and possibilities. But now I am interested in what we register when we see these stories in a more visual, discursively decentered manner. As a revisitation and re-envisioning of my original PhD research, in this paper I propose the idea and experience of the red horse, the READ horse, whereby the salient stories of the rescued horses in my dissertation are made as visibly empirical as marks on their bodies. I aim to achieve this through a science art worlding, inspired by Donna Haraway's work, project that will take the still living bodies of the aforementioned horses, that's Fly, Ferdy, Shuby, and Manny, from my dissertation and use them as canvases upon which to project via 3D mapping technology their life stories as I, their curator, have collected them both during my fieldwork and in the years since. This project is inspired by the history of equine art that I encountered during my time in Bluegrass, Kentucky, that pays great fetishized attention to horses' bodies. From George Stubbs' visceral studies of equine anatomy in the 19th century to the artfully designed statues of the Horse Mania public art campaign that accompanied Lexington's hosting of the 2010 World Equestrian Games, my project, Red Horse, is also preoccupied with the landscape and possibilities that lie in the shapes and contours of the equine form. But unlike these predecessors, my project seeks out bodies that are still living and moving, marked with stories still spinning with paradoxes of living and dying. In this paper, I will not only further elaborate on the epistemological approach of Red Horse, but also share the conundrums I face in executing this project, such as, how do we gain consent from creatures that do not share our language worlds? How do we, human artist scientists, choose what stories to be told without enacting humanocentric curatorial bias or violence? And if we are given the chance to read the life stories of horses on their bodies, what would we humans read if we saw each other's stories laid bare on the canvas of our bodies? According to Projection Mapping Central, projection mapping uses everyday video projectors, but instead of projecting on a flat screen, example to display a PowerPoint, light is mapped onto any surface, turning common objects of any 3D shape into interactive displays. More formally, projection mapping is the display of an image on a non-flat or non-white surface. I am drawn to the possibilities of projection mapping after learning of the 2015 projection show on St. Peter's Basilica. Titled Fiat Lux, May There Be Light, Illuminating Our Common Home, this projection event was choreographed to illuminate the perils of climate change and species loss concurrent with the Paris Climate Agreement meetings. Backed by the World Bank and underscored by the Catholic Church's environmental concern, photographs by Sebastião Salgado of Brazil, Joel Sartor of the United States, and Frenchman Yann Arthus Bertrand flowed between each other and across the canvas of the basilica, sometimes to the sound of music or habitat, sometimes to punctuating silence, as viewers watched beautiful images of lions interspersed with climate degradation. If Fiat Lux was an example of projection mapping on the contours of a larger-than-life canvas, projection mapping can also illuminate the contours of an actual living body in incredibly vivid and impactful ways. An example of this comes from 2017, when model Heidi Klum donned a head-to-toe bodysuit, struck a power pose, and served as the canvas for a stunning choreography of video, color, and graphics that cried out for cyborgian analysis. Of note is how still she was able to stand and how the projection mapping equipment was trained to project so accurately according to the contours of her body canvas. Also of note is how her face was even covered, save for 2 eye slits, to allow for various facial iterations to project and morph across this part of her body. Harnessing the political messaging of Fiat Lux, and in reference to the living body canvas of Klum, the projection choreography I seek to cast on the contouring canvas of my dissertation, Horses, will be totally specific to equine sensory needs and aesthetic possibilities. In addition to the standard equipment setup of a projector and data source, projection mapping achieves its incredible visual effect through software and apps that help the artist-curator not only select and edit their video sequences, but map the surfaces, or as I've been calling them, canvases, for their specific dimensions, depths, and so forth. Through such technology, a plain white Christmas tree canvas can become visually animated in an augmented reality sort of way. And so what of the equine canvases? What can all this technology and light achieve there? For this presentation, I will highlight only one of my dissertation horses, Ferdy. As I tell his story quickly, please keep in mind that the narrative I share is truncated, but also that the images I edit to accompany it are all possible content from what might be eventually choreographed to project on the specifics of his body, circa 2019. When I met Ferdy in 2011, it was while he was living at the Maker's Mark Secretariat Center in the Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington. Though Ferdy still allowed the occasional amateur rider to take lessons on him as a designated school horse, his track injuries were catching up with him, and he was becoming more and more a symbolic resident of MMSC, is the shorthand. Ferdy was enshrined and boarded essentially at MMSC, not because of his value as a rideable horse, but as a mascot for anti-horse slaughter activism because of who his father or sire was. Ferdy's registered racing name is Ferdinand Starr, named after Ferdinand, a winner of the 1986 Kentucky Derby, whose subsequent demise as a racing and breeding stallion led him to slaughter in Japan in 2002. The outcry over Ferdinand's ignoble treatment and death not only united and mobilized many anti-horse slaughter groups, but caused the racing industry and its affiliates, like the TRF, to address the situation more directly with a never again sort of vow. Thus, after a not-so-impressive racing career, Ferdy was eventually taken into care by the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation, the TRF, sustained in his ability to survive and not be sold for slaughter because Ferdinand was his sire. My fieldwork ended in December 2011, and I went on to write up my dissertation until I successfully defended and submitted in 2014. During this whole time, I kept in touch with my dissertation horses by being friends with their human caregivers, who were also my research participants, quite honestly through Facebook. This was how I came to learn that Ferdy eventually left the TRF system and rejoined Fly, who had been his stablemate at the Maker's Mark Secretariat Center, under the care of Melissa, who had been a primary research participant of mine. After graduating from the University of Kentucky, Melissa and her partner bought a farm in North Carolina where she could continue her dedicated equestrianship. To say that Ferdy was in good, loving hands was an understatement. This became especially apparent when last winter, 2018, he became critically ill with an infection in his leg that initially defied all vet treatments. Melissa posted on Facebook about his condition and asked for prayers and even set up a care fund via TRF. Having touched so many lives because of his and his father's stories, Ferdy was rallied around by his social media contacts, including myself. Having already gained preliminary consent from Melissa to attempt this project on Ferdy, at its core, this project is indebted to the horses and the consent they can either give or deny me when the time to attempt the projection event is nigh. I take very seriously this notion of equine consent, as it is such a salient flashpoint in so many discussions of how we humans truly do relate to these creatures. So here is how I am thinking about gaining consent with my dissertation horses. In my dissertation research, so many times I observed people talking about asking horses to do something while training them. It became important for the horse to learn the question, like leg pressure or other forward movement gestures, and for the horse to supply the right answer in order for them to show that they were trainable and consequently redeemable as a rescue. But I also observed this training orientation as one that saw it useful to reframe force and human authority by asking a horse instead of telling them what to do. In this way, interspecies partnership was more possible and thus more valued, as importance was placed on how smart and joined up a horse could become and vice versa. for the human. So following in this tradition, I see each step in gaining my dissertation horse's consent as an ask, breaking down the process toward projection into small, gentle, and clear asks that I hope I am smart and joined up enough to accomplish. I see this route as being one of providing penultimate therapy to the horse by calming them without any chemical or forceful means and providing them the beneficial connection between the projection events and feeling totally at ease and in healing mode. So I call this the therapy route of consent, and it will include extensive grooming, which also essentially helps prepare the surface of the canvas, any combination of equine massage, acupuncture, and chiropractic work, a low sensory event environment to offset the lighting and electronic elements associated with staging and capturing event, and treats and food, as a grazing horse is placated and a secure feeling horse. As a generator of many of the research findings and depictions I propose to project on the horses' bodies, as well as the director and primary asker of this projection art event, there will be an unavoidable humanocentric authoring of what gets depicted, how, and why. But the ultimate permission and basis for co-creation comes from the horse accepting this event entanglement with their sensory and cognitive world. This project is nothing without the horse's consent to have their bodies projected upon. I must state that contingency again and again, yet also signal that the possibility of no co-creation as still an acceptable part of what I intend with this science art worlding, to extend autonomy, agency, and informed consent to every community of study, particularly the multi-species ones, and see what happens. Only therein can co-creation be authentic expression and research findings accurate. Only therein can the horse be read.